watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
In the There's Always Something department, the latest flap in Israel is over a new proposed bill introduced by Israel's right-wing party, Yisrael Beitenu, which is led by Avigdor Lieberman and which represents a large number of Olim from the former Soviet Union. If passed, this bill would create a law in Israel that would in effect make it so that only someone who had served in the Israeli Defense Forces could serve in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. Any person who refused either to serve in the IDF or to serve Israel in some alternative national service would be barred for running for public office. So let me say it again. To be eligible for the Knesset, a person would have to have served in the IDF or in some other form of national service. Anyone who refused to serve in the IDF or to serve in some other form of national service would be ineligible, would be barred from becoming a Knesset member. At the moment, many ultra-Orthodox Jews do not serve in the IDF, usually because they're studying in yeshiva. And virtually no Palestinian Arab Israelis serve in the IDF, though there are Arab Bedouins and Druze who do serve in the Israeli army, but not Israeli Palestinian Arabs. At the moment, there is a growing public resentment with the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox black hats, who do not serve in the IDF. But the real target of the Yisrael Beitenu bill are the Arab Israelis, especially after an Arab member of the Knesset joined in the Palestinian flotilla out of Turkey, which sought to break the Israeli blockade of Gaza, resulting in a deadly clash between Palestinian extremists and Israeli Navy SEALs. To those in Yisrael Beitenu, for an Israeli parliament member to be part of such a move against the state of Israel crosses a line, is a form of political anarchy, if not treason. And from this perspective, Arab Israelis who want to see an end to the Jewish state of Israel should not be in the Israeli Knesset. And again, for some background, it is true that Israeli Arabs, by and large, neither serve in the IDF nor do they engage in alternative military service. But at the same time, Israeli Arabs are Israeli citizens, contrary to what many Americans believe, even American Jews. Arab Israeli citizens have every civil, social, and political right that any Jewish Israeli has. This is not to say that Arab Israelis don't live with a degree of second-class status in Israel, which Israelis openly acknowledge, and most argue that this must be corrected. But in terms of the law, Arab Israelis are complete Israeli citizens, with the right, by the way, to serve in the Israeli army, hold any position in the IDF, and again, what many American Jews and Americans in general do not know is that there are Arab political parties in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. Actually, there are three parties in the Knesset that have Arab roots. There's the United Arab List and Balad, each with 3 seats, and Ta'al, which has 1 seat. But if Yisrael Beitenu could have its way, Arab Israelis would be ineligible to serve in the democratically elected Israeli parliament. Now, many in Israel see this bill as a direct assault on Israeli democracy. And many in Israel are calling this bill the most radical proposal Avigdor Lieberman and Yisrael Beitenu has ever made. Well, for some comment and perspective, we're very pleased to be joined now from Israel by Isi Leibler, the highly respected columnist for the Jerusalem Post. Isi, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. It's good to speak to you from Yerushalayim.
Thank you, Isi. So, first of all, you've seen the draft of this bill. You heard my introduction. Do you think that I have the goals of this bill pretty much correct in terms of the aims of Yisrael Beitenu?
My gut feeling is that this bill is just a ploy to get a few more votes. It has no hope of getting carried. And I think it's part of the approach of Yisrael Beitenu to try to popularize itself by getting right-wing people to steer more in this direction. I would certainly like to see something which gives people who serve the army an advantage over those who don't. But this is not the way, and I'm sure that the overwhelming majority of Israelis and the Knesset will reject this bill. It will not get anywhere.
I want to make this clear. I want to give you a chance to make it clear. From your perspective, is there any validity to the goals of this bill at all?
There is a validity in the goal of the bill to try to distinguish and to give some benefits to people that serve in the army as against people who are unwilling to contribute towards the welfare of the country or participate and give their civic and partake in their civic obligations.
Okay, but should the advantages be of a political nature?
Definitely not. Definitely not. And that's why I'm saying to you, it might make a lot of publicity overseas, but over here, most people are yawning because nobody takes it too seriously.
Okay. Incidentally, that's very important for us to understand. Is it your sense that if we were on the streets of Jerusalem with you or Tel Aviv or Netanya, wherever, this is another hohum incident as far as the Israeli public is concerned?
I think so. And I'd be very, very surprised. Of course, there's a lot of resentment at the moment in the street against the behavior of a small minority of the Haredim, of the ultra-Orthodox. There's enormous resentment at the behavior of some of the Arab political representatives who have identified themselves as the enemies of Israel. But the way to deal with this is not by disenfranchising them. The way to deal with this is by constructive legislation. And I'm hopeful that public opinion will bring this about ultimately. If we had a unity government today, and if we had a better electoral system, this would never be in the process of even being considered.
And that's because why? Explain why the political system in some way makes this bill even a possibility. Not that it's possible that it would be passed, but even to be introduced. What is it that bothers you most as an Israeli with the political system in Israel?
The political system enables small, one-dimensional parties that have very little standing other than looking after the interests of their constituents, and I'm thinking in particular of the ultra-Orthodox parties, and gives them excessive leverage and enables them to force a government which is dependent on their votes to make a government, to give in to things that they would normally not do. And that is the weakness of the kind of proportional system we have here, which makes people which makes the political parties able to maneuver in a way that they would not do so in most other democracies. And that's the reform that most Israelis want to see brought about.
By the way, you say it so clearly, and I want to make sure everybody understands. The Israeli parliament is made up of 120 members, and the ruling party, the party in power, must have a majority, must have 61 or more seats. Since no one party in Israel ever has been able to garner 61% of the vote, the only way they can create a government in power is by having coalitions with smaller parties. In essence, The smaller parties, therefore, have, as you just pointed out, an inordinate amount of power because they have the ability to threaten to bring the government down anytime they wanted to leave the coalition, correct?
Absolutely correct.
Would you like to see in Israel the kind of basic two-party system that we have in the United States and even in the British Parliament, after which the Knesset was modeled? There really are two major parties in the British Parliament. But would you like to see the American style of government be implemented in Israel?
I don't know about the American style of government, but I certainly would like to see a constituency government where people are who are elected to the Knesset are responsible to their constituents rather than to a party. In a proportional representational system, they are not. And you have this multiplicity of parties. You need stability. The centre of the country should be ruling the country, not the extremes. And in this electoral system, it allows itself open to the abuse of minority parties. So yes, I believe, and not only me, but I think you'd find 70 to 80% of Israelis would want to see a change in the electoral system. And if we had a unity government and they could put aside their immediate alliances for a moment, I'm sure that they could come to such an achievement. Had Kadima and Likud come together after the last elections, they could have changed the whole system.
Why didn't they?
Because of personal motives on the part of the people leading them, because the ideological differences between both parties are marginal. Believe me, if you take the people in Likud and take the people in Kadima, many of whom came from Likud, they are really should not be separate parties. And I think that Kadima now is going to fall apart as new parties emerge. I mean, the party that could be with Yair Lapid will take some of their votes, and as with any other splinter parties. It's all chaos in this particular system. And that's one of the things that I think is the main objective, could change the quality of political life in this country and stabilize it if we had electoral reform.
Explain something to us. Tzipi Livni leads Kadima, correct?
Yes.
She is not normally associated with, in anyone's mind, with Likud. How do you say that Likud, which is led by Netanyahu, and Kadima, which is led by Tzipi Livni, basically have a similar ideology?
I don't think that if Tzipi Livni's party was in power, the policies that are being undertaken now by the Likud government would be any different. They would be basically the same. And I think that Tzipi Livni has not demonstrated the responsibility of a leader in opposition who knows when to oppose and when to move in and work in conjunction with a government. I think that there is really no ideological differences between these two parties. None at all.
Interesting.
They're both basically pragmatic. You may have some more to the right and some more to the left, but that'll apply to both parties. You'll have people, for example, in Kadima who are more to the right than many people in Likud. And you'll have some people in Likud who are more to the left than some people in Kadima. It should not be two separate parties. It should be one party.
You know, Izzy, as we're taping, the United States of America is watching the Republican Party engage in its own attempt to select a Republican candidate for president. And there has been extraordinary bitterness and vitriol among the Republican candidates, very similar to what was the vitriol between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton 4 years earlier in the last election. But it seems that part of politics is that people who want power for themselves, either because they're driven by ego and also driven by a sense of public service, they tend to be willing to make the opponent the enemy, both ideologically and even sometimes of the nation as a whole. To what extent is what we see happening in Israel between Kadima and Likud a matter of personalities between Tzipi Livni and Benjamin Netanyahu, and for that matter, some of the other people who head political parties in Israel?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think it's very much that. And whereas it can apply perhaps in the Republican Party in America, which is not facing existential threats. We here in Israel are very angry at the fact that our politicians can't set aside their personal objectives and unite in the interest of the people, because today, as never before, most people feel there should be a unity government, and there would be a unity government. One has to look back at the days of Menachem Begin. When Menachem Begin was in the opposition, whenever he left the country, he would go out, and if people asked him questions, he'd say, I'm a member of the opposition, and my role when I go outside of this country is to present the views of the government without getting involved into party politics. You had the same thing with Netanyahu, but somehow or other, something has happened in the last 10 years and it's all fallen apart. And there's a kind of selfishness and not putting the national interest at the forefront, which has gripped politics. And that's a very sad thing for us, because today as never before, both the people and anybody who's involved recognizes the enormous importance of unity. The people want unity, the politicians are not delivering.
I want to ask you a personal question. As you look at yourself, Isi, over the last, I'm going to use the term of 5 years. Over the past 5 years, have you moved from what may have been a more rightist position towards the center? Or do you consider yourself to be today representing the same political perspective that you would have had we had this conversation 5 years ago?
I don't think there's been a great change. I think there's been a great change in the country because the whole of the country has kind of moved towards the center. Mm-hmm. If you look at the Likud government and you look at Netanyahu, who was regarded outside as a right-winger, this is the man who's got his party to accept a two-state solution. The left, the far left, have been largely isolated. The people that talked about the greater Israel are a very small minority, and I think you'll find that something like 70 to 80% of the people, there's a consensus on what we want, and what we basically want in terms of security anyway, is a situation where we don't rule over the Palestinians, where we're able to run our lives with security, which we can't have now without ruling over them. That's the problem that we face. And to that extent, I think, I've moved backwards and forwards. I could find myself there. I was very close to Yitzhak Rabin. I had my worries about Oslo, and I think that those worries have proven to be justified, but I know that his heart was in the right position and he was thinking only of the country. Today, many politicians are thinking more about where it's going to get them tomorrow than the national interest. That's the feeling amongst Israelis, and that's why Israelis are not enamored with their politicians. Mm-hmm. And that's why, unfortunately, some of the best people refuse to get involved in politics. And to an extent, I think that the level of quality of the people in the Knesset today is much lower than it was, say, 20 and certainly 40 years ago, when there was idealism and where the concept of the national interest was always uppermost in people's minds.
Isi, without making any reference to your age, if you were 20 years younger, would you run for public office?
It's a very difficult question. When I was younger, that's the way I would have thought. Today, in the context of the politics, I'm not sure. Uh-huh. If politics 20 years ago was the way it was today, I'm not sure I would want to.
At one point, Israel was, and I don't want to romanticize or idealize, but there were among the early, quote, politicians, it was more of a statesman than a politician. Do you know what I mean?
Much more of a statesman than a politician. And there's a certain element of hedonism that's come into politics, and that doesn't apply to the right or the left, but to all the parties. That wasn't there. Because if you look at the founding fathers, whether it was Ben-Gurion or whether it was Begin, these were people who lived very, very humble lives. Mm-hmm. And they went out of their way to demonstrate that their passion was for the people, not to promote themselves and not to lead the good life. That's not necessarily the case with many of the political leaders across the board, I must say, not in particular to anyone. I mean, people have been saying this about Netanyahu, but he's no more responsible for this than all his other counterparts. They're all the same, in the same boat.
The bottom line for you is you're telling us there's really no chance at all that the law proposed by Yisrael Beitenu about who or who could not serve in the Israeli Knesset is likely to be resoundingly defeated, and that it does not represent the sentiments of the overwhelming number of Israelis, correct?
That is correct, although let me say that he will be getting a responsive chord in terms of anger at those minority groups, particularly the Haredim, who are not serving in the army and whose rabbis are telling many of their followers not to work and to live off the state. These are things that the people are getting fed up with, and there's going to be changes.
By the way, you are Orthodox yourself, Isi, and this upsets you also, doesn't it?
Well, it affects me very much, but my grandchildren, my grandson today graduated as an officer in the army. And, when I'm told by people who are ultra-Orthodox that they don't have to serve in the army because they're praying for me, I say to them, we can pray and serve in the army at the same time. And in fact, it's a mitzvah to defend a Jewish state. And I just cannot go along with this business of being in the country and not contributing towards the country. And to that extent, it's over the board. There's a great feeling of resentment. The rabbis that have emerged are introducing such stringencies. I don't care how a person wants to live a life. I have the greatest respect for an ultra-Orthodox family that wants to live a particular way of life. It may not be my way of life. They may be much more stringent upon themselves, on their rituals and other areas. They're entitled to do that, but they're not entitled to try to impose that on the rest of the people. That's where the resentment comes in, and it's polarizing the people. The sad thing is that Israelis are becoming more and more traditional. It's ironical. There are many, many more people in Israel today who are inclined towards tradition than there were 50 years ago when the order of the day was secularism. And at the same time, there's an enormous resentment against some of these rabbis because of their stance, because of their lack of compassion, and because of their inability to understand that they can't impose their standards on other people. It's a very difficult situation. We will overcome it. And the anger that has come because of the despicable behavior of small numbers of them, and I say small numbers because they are not representative of even the ultra-Orthodox world, but the despicable behavior of these people, I'm more angry with the police than I am with the ultra-Orthodox themselves, because the police should be arresting and treating these people much more toughly than they do. And if they did, we wouldn't have that situation. They wouldn't dare behave like that in the diaspora. And in a diaspora, you have ultra-Orthodox families that get a secular education, that earn a livelihood, and live as part and parcel of the country. It's only here in Israel that this has become, and I say this is terribly closely related to the system of the electoral system. Mm-hmm. I'll say even further, I find it very difficult for a situation when we had outstanding chief rabbis, like Rabbi Goren, like the first chief rabbi Herzog. We had great people who were never like this. Are people like the present chief rabbis better, superior to these people that they can impose and turn the clock back? I say no. I say it's outrageous. So there's a lot of anger out there, but I'm hopeful that because of the noise that has been made, that there will be substantial changes taking place, because there is pressure being put on all the political parties to stop capitulating to them. And if they don't, they may lose a lot of votes.
So you feel there are winds of change coming to Israel in terms of the way the ultra-Orthodox have had a stranglehold on Israel?
I say that the ultra-Orthodox rabbinate, who have hijacked and replaced the moderate, centrist, modern Orthodox, national religious rabbinate, that they have gone too far, and that there is a reaction that will take place and bring back some moderation into the system. There's also economically, it is impossible for a country such as ours, and we're doing very well, but nevertheless it's impossible for a country such as ours to continue paying welfare for people who are an ever-growing proportion of the community who don't want to work. That is a big difference. And there's also the resentment of people who see their sons going to the army and saying, why should they be exempt? This is, society's changing. And ultimately, people pressures, people power does have an impact. And I believe we will have an impact on this.
You know, in America, the issue is always framed in terms of Jewish religious pluralism. Do you feel in any way what you're describing may create a greater receptivity in Israel to the styles of American Jewish pluralism that American Jews are hoping for in the state of Israel?
It's very difficult to make the analogy between America and Israel, because in the diaspora, Reform and conservative Jews are of a different category than what we have here. We have, for example, conservative Jews here who are playing an extraordinarily important role, but they're different from their counterparts in America. The principle, yes, I believe it will come inevitably, and it should be there. And what I don't understand is we may have differences. An Orthodox Jew and a conservative Jew and a Reform Jew have differences, but goodness, they still have much more in common against Jews who are completely atheistic and secular. And belief in God, belief in Jewish traditions. Some of the children that go to some of the secular schools here in Israel become really Hebrew-speaking Canaanites. Yes. They do not understand their traditions or their background. Now, I would be very happy to see these people getting a Reform or a conservative background rather than nothing at all. And there's room for that, and it will come in time.
Izzy, again, I love talking to you. You're coming to America soon. I hope you and I get the chance to meet in studio, but I thank you so much for going out of your way and making sure you make yourself available for the Shalom TV audience. Kol tuv v'hatzlacha in all you do. I wish you well and Naomi well, and I look forward to seeing you very, very soon.
Thank you very much. We're looking forward also.
And that was my conversation with Isi Leibler, Jerusalem Post columnist, and of course the dear friend of Shalom TV and L'chaim. So what do you think? Does the fact that Israel Beitenu tried to institute this new bill, which Izzy says, and most people agree, has absolutely no chance of passing, but does reflect a certain kind of resentment, not only against Arab Israelis who may be doing things that seem to be antithetical to the long-term existence of the state of Israel, but also are upset with the way in which some of the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, have managed their own lives in the state of Israel and have tried to avoid military service and service to the state of Israel. To what extent are you sympathetic to the kind of approach that Isi Leibler brought to this discussion? Please share your thoughts with me. Email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish Education in Media.